Hello everyone, I'm Colin and welcome back to my channel. As a lot of you know, I have an interest in medical controversies and mysteries and especially pseudoscience. And coincidentally, I have a story of my own that involves all of those things. I've referenced this experience a couple times in passing, but I knew it deserved its own dedicated video. Because of the nature of the research I've been doing for a few of my previous videos, I couldn't not think about it, and actually that work has caused me to reflect and I think finally be at peace with everything, for the most part anyway. I decided to share my medical mystery because I think it might be helpful to some people, and in a lot of ways, writing all this out has been a helpful experience for me. It's a complicated story, and I'm gonna go ahead and spoil the ending by saying this is a mystery with no confirmed solution. Just speculation. But it feels especially relevant to a lot of the things that I've been exploring lately and some of the responses that I've been getting. I'll go ahead and warn you, there will be a lot of discussion of vomiting and eating issues if you're sensitive to that kind of thing. So it all started the day I turned 16. I was having a party with friends and family in the evening, but my dad took me out for lunch in the afternoon. And given that I am somewhat of a connoisseur of garbage, I wanted to go to White Castle, which proceeded to make me violently ill. Happy birthday to me. I recovered enough to have my party in the evening, so everyone thought it was just greasy fast food doing what it does to the human body. I mean, to be fair, I feel like if you voluntarily eat at White Castle, you are signing up to be violently ill. But then the illness just came back. I think by the next day or over the next couple of days, I am not exaggerating when I say I felt almost daily nausea for I think over a year after that day. So clearly it wasn't just White Castle's fault. But it felt like it was almost the catalyst though, like that one instance was the wrench in my digestive works. And in the beginning, it wasn't just nausea, it was frequent vomiting. I could hardly eat, and sometimes even the smell of food would make me feel sick. There were a couple of what I considered to be like safe foods. Like I specifically remember raw baby carrots and blueberries. Ironically, when I did finally get better, I couldn't stand raw carrots or blueberries for the longest time. I just associated them with this awful time in my life. The symptoms were usually the worst in the morning, and I think it was because I was lying down all night. I would literally wake up in the wee hours of the morning and have to sit up because my nausea and heartburn were so bad. Oh my god. The worst part actually was the heartburn. I had to sleep sitting up a lot because if I was horizontal for too long, I could literally feel like acid in my throat. Some people get heartburn from eating too much or eating something that doesn't agree with them. I found out that I get it if I wait too long to eat because the stomach acid wants to be working, but there's nothing there. It was a vicious cycle because my body physically needed food and the nausea prevented me from eating, and the heartburn I got from not eating also made me feel sick. So that was fun. And when I would eventually force myself to eat something, a lot of times it would just come back up. I think the most miserable thing was, sometimes when you're sick, it's like if I could just throw up, I would feel so much better. Like I've had a stomach bug and I would throw up and feel like the wave of relief, even if it only lasted for a little while. I think I even had that feeling on my birthday, like after the White Castle incident. But with this mystery illness, I would throw up, but I would feel no different. Still nauseated, still had heartburn, and like my stomach would hurt and cramp because I think it was like trying to digest, but there just wasn't anything in it. Okay, I looked this up because I wasn't sure if that was an accurate description. And I think the cramping was actually the migrating motor complex. Apparently it's your digestive system like clearing the way for more food, and it stops when you eat. It's what causes your stomach to growl when you're hungry. So there was a lot of that. But obviously I wasn't eating anything, so it just didn't stop and it hurt a lot. And dealing with the nausea was actually so much worse when I hadn't eaten anything because there's just nothing happening. It was just like dry heaving with no relief at all. It was miserable. And this lasted with varying degrees of severity for, like I said, like a year. The heartburn and nausea were very consistent, but they were seemingly like affected by gravity, like it was worse if I was lying down. And eventually I got to the point where I would feel better like throughout the course of the day and mostly be able to eat normally. So it did get a little better over time, but I would have random flare-ups here and there. My parents took me to urgent care a couple times because it didn't make any sense. Food poisoning or a stomach bug wouldn't last weeks or months, and it wouldn't have periods of improvement, right? I'm not sure if urgent care is something people have outside the US. It's not like the emergency room, but it is for things that are like, well, urgent. Imagine that. It can take a long time to get an appointment with a primary care provider, so that's what urgent care is for. Not for like emergencies like a broken bone or like a heart attack. But I've been to urgent care for strep throat before, stuff like that. Unfortunately, they couldn't figure out what was wrong. All they could do was give me anti-nausea medication. And I think when we went back a separate time, they gave me something for heartburn. In retrospect, yeah, I don't know what else we expected urgent care to do. I finally did see a doctor to get labs done, and I don't remember if it was my mom or maybe just the doctor thought of it, but they like examined my gallbladder because apparently that can cause a lot of like digestive problems. And they didn't think that was the issue because it didn't hurt or like feel abnormal in any way. So I had the blood test and there was nothing abnormal there either. So I just had this constant misery with no apparent cause. And sure, like the anti-nausea medication worked, but it wasn't fixing the root cause. It was just masking the main symptom. And I couldn't take it all the time because the main side effect was drowsiness. One time I accidentally took too much and basically astral projected all day at school. And the heartburn medicine, I don't remember if there was just some adverse side effect or if it just didn't work. Now, looking back, I think those things were supposed to just help me function until we figured out the problem. But they didn't really help me very much, and we were no closer to figuring out the problem. So one integral piece of this story is that my parents are into alternative medicine, chiropractic, naturopathy, aromatherapy, etc. They will still see regular doctors for urgent things. Like they clearly did take me to see like real healthcare providers several times, but it's called alternative medicine for a reason, because that's quite often what people turn to when conventional medicine hasn't helped. So my mom was like, you probably need to do a liver cleanse, which is something I think she had done herself. So I assume she thought it helped her and maybe it would help me. And I said before, and I'll say again, that you don't need to cleanse your liver. Its whole job is to detox your body. And if you have something wrong with your liver, that's not something supplements or detox tea or whatever is going to fix. Even back then, I had my doubts, but I was miserable, and at that point I was willing to try anything. Plus I was 16, so of course I'm going to take what my mom gives me, which in this case was literal handfuls of these giant supplement capsules. They were like horse pills. I really couldn't tell you what was in them. I remember part of the protocol was that you couldn't eat any real food. You could only have water and a little juice and of course these supplements, however many you were supposed to take at a time, but it was a lot. I don't remember how long it was supposed to last. I think maybe like 24 hours, but I couldn't do it. The supplements themselves made me sick. Like I said, I couldn't tell you what was in them, but I think the actual main issue was all the repetitive swallowing when I already had trouble keeping things down. And I can still remember the just disgusting taste of the like plasticky coating. Ugh. It's been over 12 years and still just thinking about it grosses me out. If anything, I felt way worse after that. My mom did apologize, and she felt bad that it didn't work, and I know she was just trying to help, but it sure didn't. I do recall eating some cheese after that, and it was like the best thing I had ever eaten. After nothing but disgusting pills and water all day, cheese was like ambrosia. Well, that's still true. I guess in a weird way, the cleanse kind of helped because it made me want to taste literally anything else with any flavor at all. And again, I'm not 100% sure, but I do feel like the ingredients probably also gave me some gastrointestinal issues, which is never good, on top of everything else I already had. I also remember my mom getting me to try something else. It actually might have been part of the same liver protocol, but it might have been something completely different. I don't remember. But it was like I had to drink something nasty and then very quickly lay on, I think, my left side, something to do with the digestion. I don't know. I have no idea. But it didn't help. So, like I mentioned before, it wasn't that I was not eating for a whole year. I wouldn't have survived. There were periods of time where I felt mostly normal besides the heartburn and occasionally nausea. But there were other times where I felt just terrible. One time we had some relatives visiting and my mom made potato soup. And I love potato soup, and you would think that would be a pretty safe food when you feel sick. But no, I literally had to just go to my room to get away from the smell and eat my sad little baby carrots. Going out to eat was my own personal hell. Even the thought of it made me sick. Like when we get to the restaurant, I was just sitting there in misery. I think a lot of it was attached to the smell, just being in an environment with that much food and that many different smells. Mild things were better. I remember rotisserie chicken, a little bit of rotisserie chicken was fine once. And I do remember I had a little bit of crab cakes and green beans at a Red Lobster one time. But that's weird, right? Like we are talking about like slightly nicer restaurants, like not White Castle. It kind of made sense that fast food made me sick, but like, why was I barely choking down green beans? Like, my mom is a good cook, and she makes healthier meals, but she still uses butter and cheese. So, I don't know. It didn't make any sense because towards the end of all this nonsense, I was feeling quite a bit better, and I was able to eat the things she cooked most of the time. So, there was just some weird hang-up about restaurants that I couldn't explain. But even though I was improving mostly over time, I was quite often still miserable. Well, there was an end in sight because one day my mom came home from her chiropractor, who she's seen for a very long time, and he is also a naturopath. So she told him my symptoms, and he said, well, that does sound like a gallbladder problem, and actually it doesn't matter if it hurts or not. So here is a supplement for that. Now, again, I couldn't tell you what this supplement was. This was over a decade ago, and I don't have it anymore. Although I'm pretty sure I did read the ingredients like years later and found out it had like bull testicles in it. Holy shit, I think I found it. My parents talk about this brand all the time, and I am 99% sure this is the one. Standard process food supplements for gallbladder. Oh, this picture is triggering me so hard right now. I definitely recognize the label. That hasn't changed in over a decade. That's crazy. Anyway, it wasn't bull testicles. It was specifically bovine prostate, if this is the right supplement. So there's that, amongst all these other ingredients. And you'll also notice the disclaimer that, quote, these statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease, end quote. More on that later. I think I was a little hesitant at first because of the liver cleanse incident, but this was quite a bit different. It was just a tiny little tablet, like about the size of an ibuprofen. And it didn't really taste like anything, and I only had to take a couple of them at a time. Again, I was desperate, so of course I took them. And I felt relief, I want to say the same day. It was wild. I could have cried, and maybe I did. I don't remember. The symptoms would come back, but I continued to take the supplements, and I continued to feel better. And eventually, I only took them when I felt like occasional symptoms, like when the heartburn and nausea would flare up. Going to restaurants was still a challenge for quite some time, and I would take one before we went, and it seemed to help. But eventually, I just didn't need them anymore. It was like a complete recovery. So I guess that's it then. Conventional healthcare professionals missed my gallbladder issue. The naturopath figured it out immediately, and his supplements are a cure for whatever affliction mine had. That's the explanation I went with. I mean, what else could it have been? But then a few years later, I started getting more into science and skepticism. I left behind a lot of the things I used to believe, and one of those things was naturopathy. I feel like we have to break down the word naturopathy a little bit because it is kind of complicated. Naturopathy is an umbrella term. Usually it refers to quote-unquote natural remedies, things like herbal supplements and homeopathy. But a lot of practitioners also use it to refer to other treatments like physical therapy, massage, chiropractic, acupuncture. You might also hear people refer to naturopathic medicine as holistic. Practitioners like to say that unlike conventional doctors, they focus on the whole body and they strive to help your body heal itself through these various therapies. There are naturopathic doctors, but they don't and can't prescribe real pharmaceuticals or like do surgery. A lot of them are against surgery and vaccines and medicine in general. So naturopathy can encompass things like physical therapy, which is an evidence-based practice, but it also includes things like homeopathy, which is nothing. Is literally sugar pills. When I say I'm a skeptic, I mean I go wherever the scientific evidence leads me, at least the best I can interpret the science as a non-professional. And so many practices that fall under the naturopathy umbrella do not have good scientific backing. To me, the word naturopathy is itself a red flag, because maybe naturopaths do encourage some sound practices, but typically the people who practice evidence-based therapies and understand the science behind it are not calling themselves naturopaths. All right, so with all that being said, how can I be a skeptic when I have this firsthand experience? Alternative medicine healed me, didn't it? Well, at first I just interpreted my experience the way it seemed, of course, and I would tell people that story. I had a gallbladder issue that healthcare providers missed, and a naturopath cured it with dietary supplements. To be honest, I wrestled with how to explain this for a long time, but I have been looking more closely into medical things for this channel, and because of that, I do have a theory. And now is where I give my regular disclaimer that I am not a medical professional, and I have no authority to give medical advice. I have an English degree. But in spite of the fact that medicine is extremely outside of my field, I feel like it's only reasonable for me to speculate about what happened to me, to just offer alternative explanations that make more sense. Keeping in mind that this was over a decade ago and there's no way to go back in time and prove anything. But a lot of the research I've been doing has reframed how I view this anecdote. I think the first problem is just that. It's an anecdote. I wasn't part of a scientific study, and as far as I know, there isn't one that proves these dietary supplements or herbal remedies cure gallbladder disease. And that's another problem. Did I actually have gallbladder disease? I don't know. It was never confirmed. I have never met this chiropractor / naturopath in my life. He just heard about my symptoms secondhand from my mom and quote-unquote diagnosed me sight unseen and just assumed what treatment I needed too. No examination, no follow-up. Lest we forget that he's a chiropractor and has no authority to diagnose something like that. I struggled for so long with how to explain this experience as a skeptic, and somehow it took me all this time to step back and realize that sure, the real healthcare professionals I saw didn't know what was wrong with me, but neither did this guy. He was just guessing. I only assumed he was right about my gallbladder because his suggested treatment seemed to work. Which leads us to problem 3. Did it work? I know that feels like a weird question, right? Like, what do you mean, did it work? You just said it did. But there is a difference between something working and something feeling like it's working. In reality, yes, there's a possibility these supplements cured me, But there are so many other possibilities. It could have been the placebo effect. It could have been that these supplements gave me some nutrients I was missing and did make me feel better. But my gallbladder really wasn't the issue. It could have been that I was already feeling better over time and this was just a coincidence. Or what I think is the most likely explanation, maybe a combination of all of those things. But there was one more piece of the puzzle that kept me from fully accepting any of those things as possible explanations. One symptom that I haven't mentioned yet. One tiny little twinge. It's true that I didn't experience any gallbladder pain during this year or so of misery, but I did start experiencing it shortly after I started taking the supplements. And I'm not even sure pain is the right word. It kind of hurt, and I would describe it as a twinge, but it was more like a sensation than a pain. Hyper awareness of my own internal organ, if you will. And besides the fact that overall I felt better, that twinge was exactly the confirmation I needed to accept the naturopath's word that the issue was my gallbladder. I thought the twinge was a sign that the supplement was in there doing something, and eventually that too went away. And I took that as a sign that the problem was solved. This little twinge was the one sticking point for me. Like, how could I explain that with the placebo effect or any of those other possibilities? And then recently I started looking more into psychosomatic symptoms, largely because it is a less common but reasonable differential diagnosis for lipedema. I wrote a whole segment in my lipedema video about psychosomatic pain and referenced that I had experienced it before. It was actually that investigation that helped me realize it. Because at this point, even though I'm far removed from that time and I will never be able to go back and confirm this, I truly believe that's probably what the twinge was. I believe that for a few reasons. Number one, I was an impressionable teenager. Number two, the supplements I was given helped. And number three, the explanation given was that it was a gallbladder issue. It seems very reasonable to me that my brain took all of that information and condensed it into a twinge. Now, I did consider that I was pretty young and I really didn't know where the gallbladder was located. So it would have been a really convenient coincidence that a psychosomatic twinge happened to be in the right place. But then I remembered that a doctor did palpate my gallbladder, so I did know where it was. It just didn't hurt before. And possibly the most damning piece of evidence that it was psychosomatic is that I can still manifest it if I think about it. It has been almost 13 years. I'm fine, and I never experience that little pain randomly anymore like I did back then. But literally, as I am speaking to you, I can feel the twinge. I think that's just a quirk of my brain. It's a quirk that a lot of people have. So that's my medical mystery. And as much misery as I went through, there are parts of it that I am kind of grateful for. I feel like I understand and empathize so much with people who turn to alternative medicine. It's also why I care about and speak up for people who experience psychosomatic symptoms. There have been people who take my work and assume that I'm calling people who experience that like fakes, like frauds. There is a world of difference between faking it and having a human brain that is susceptible to responding to external stimuli in ways that are unconventional. Psychosomatic pain is real pain. The only difference between psychosomatic and somatic pain is how you go about treating it. So yeah, I am kind of grateful that this has made me recognize what I now think is a grossly misunderstood and dismissed type of illness. It has also made me realize, in a way I never really thought about before, just how dangerous and insidious alternative medicine can be. Yes, I have held that opinion for many years now, but I never really thought about the harm that was specifically done to me and the harm that I ended up possibly doing to others. What I took away from this experience as a teenager was that healthcare practitioners were more incompetent than naturopaths, and that a lot of people didn't actually need their gallbladders taken out. They just needed this supplement with no scientific backing. Because I took my own interpretation of this anecdote of mine as evidence, when it certainly is not. And even worse, I spread that misinformation to other people. Yes, I had the excuse of being young and I didn't know any better, but the net outcome could have been harm. I don't know if my story did any harm or not, but it could have. It's almost worse that I don't know. I came away from that experience thinking that all doctors and nurses cared about was giving me a band-aid to mask the symptoms and sending me on my way, ignoring the fact that urgent care was probably not where I needed to be. But that introduces a new problem, because it is time-intensive and expensive to see doctors in America, especially a specialist. That's hard to say. But you know what I mean? Alternative medicine attracts people for a reason. I think there's a bit of a bait and switch where alternative medicine practitioners present themselves as a cheaper and more effective alternative, but they can end up costing people more money than they would have spent if they'd gotten real medicine. And oftentimes it doesn't work. So the real cost is lost time. You know what's crazy too is that I just told this whole story and didn't even register the fact that the liver cleanse and that other weird thing I did, those were also naturopathy and they didn't work. And yet, because this one thing that I tried did work, suddenly I was so gung-ho for naturopathy, even though there was no scientific evidence behind any of that stuff. And those things were also a waste of time and a waste of money. But of course, back then, I ignored those things and only focused on the thing that did work. In my case, these supplements were not very expensive, and they ended up feeding into the narrative that conventional medicine was only interested in expensive drugs that didn't really help, or maybe eventually unnecessary surgery. Because that was the other thing. Since we went with the explanation that it was my gallbladder, we also believed that eventually doctors would have wanted to remove it. And weren't we fortunate that we found this other solution first? I know I repeated that claim to people. I remember doing it. And while we're talking about supplements, since I finally figured out what supplement I took, I looked into this company, Standard Process, and I didn't look like super deeply, but I happened to find an article on Quackwatch by Stephen Barrett, MD, called The Shady History of Royal Lee and Standard Process Laboratories. And it seems that this company's founder, Royal Lee, and the company itself have been embroiled in controversy for literal decades. They've been accused and found guilty of making false claims since basically inception in the 1930s. In this article, Dr. Barrett quotes Kenneth Milstead, deputy director of the FDA Bureau of Enforcement in the 1960s, who said that Royal Lee was, quote, probably the largest publisher of unreliable and false nutritional information in the world, end quote. They were still making unsubstantiated claims about their products in the 70s and 80s, long after Lee's death. But since they were prosecuted so many times, these days you probably won't find the company itself making any claims about preventing, treating, or curing illness, because that's illegal. But what isn't illegal is for independent distributors to make claims about the products. Independent people like chiropractors, who are apparently the most common distributors, according to Dr. Barrett in this article. I really want to talk more about chiropractors, but that's enough for a whole other video. It just makes me angry that there are, in my opinion, unscrupulous companies like Standard Process and unscrupulous practitioners like a lot of chiropractors peddling this stuff. If I were a different person, like if my life had gone a different way, I might be super into naturopathy right now. And I suspect that because that's how my parents are. I love them and I worry about them a lot. I've looked enough into this stuff and that particular chiropractor to believe that, in my opinion, he's a quack, and this is not a unique case. As you may have noticed, there is one last piece of my medical mystery that remains unsolved. Maybe the issue wasn't my gallbladder. Maybe I got better because of the placebo effect. We'll never know, but those are possibilities. So, what was the real issue? Once again, this was a very long time ago, and I probably won't ever know for sure, but I can speculate based on what I do know. And what I do know is that I have generalized anxiety, and I have had generalized anxiety since probably conception. And one of the main manifestations of my anxiety is, I think the medical term is tummy troubles. Usually, since childhood, the night before and the morning of any kind of event or slightly different change to my routine will make me literally physically ill. And it's not just bad or uncertain scenarios, like my body cannot tell the difference between nervous anticipation and excitement. For the majority of my life, I've experienced both in the exact same way. Fortunately, it's usually just the lead up that makes me feel that way. I'm usually fine by the time of whatever event. Example, during my interview with Dr. Birch, I was a little nervous, but mostly fine. But in the days leading up to it, I was so nauseated and generally gross feeling that I wondered if I was just sick. So there's a good piece of evidence. Anxiety is a hell of a thing. And like I said, this is something I've dealt with for as long as I can remember, which is why I can't help but feel like my mystery illness starting on my birthday was not a coincidence. I was already nervous and excited for my party, and what did I do? I added White Castle to the anxious soup. It was easy for me to point to fast food as a catalyst for this whole thing, and I do think that's part of it, but I should have also been pointing to my birthday party.
And you did it at my birthday dinner.
What I now believe is that I was in a state of severe, untreated anxiety. And I think a lot of it ended up being cyclical, because not only was I just anxious to begin with, but because it continued for longer than usual, I didn't make the connection, so I started feeling anxious about being sick. It very well could be that I created a feedback loop within myself. Why was it worse in the morning? Well, it could have been that I was laying down all night. I think that was part of it. But it also could have been because pretty shortly after my birthday, which was in the summer, I started school again. And I felt a little sick on school mornings for most of the time that I was in school. And now it was just amped up to 11. And I also don't think it was a coincidence, given that my junior year of high school was a pretty challenging one. I was taking some college level courses that year, and I was pretty stressed about it. It also explains the restaurant issue. Going out in public, eating in public, which is a humiliating experience. I don't like people watching me eat, because if I spill something on myself or get something on my face, but in public, I just want to jump out the window. I mean, psychosomatic symptoms don't stop at pain. They can be anything. And for me, they are usually gastrointestinal in nature. This feels like the best and most obvious explanation to me, keeping in mind that I cannot time travel and I will never know. But considering that I have had, after that, very similar symptoms because of anxiety, it really just makes sense. But that's also pretty sad, isn't it? Like, I could have had severe unmanaged anxiety for over a year and no one knew. No one even presented it as a possibility. And if they had, I'm sure my parents or I would have viewed it as dismissive. A lot of people do receive a diagnosis of anxiety or depression as a way to explain mysterious symptoms. Sometimes that is wrong, but sometimes it could be right. Diagnosing someone who has symptoms with no apparent cause is hard. Going through a long list of differential diagnoses is hard, especially in the US, where time and money are extremely limited resources. Not to mention, there are bad healthcare practitioners who do use mental health as a scapegoat instead of exploring all options. But in my case, can I call the practitioners who examined me bad because they might have missed my mental health condition? The same way I used to blame them for missing my gallbladder issue? I don't know, but I don't feel like I can. I think I slipped through the cracks for a lot of reasons. Lack of time, lack of resources, the fact that we turned to alternative medicine instead of continuing to seek out an answer from specialists. And in my case, I was pretty privileged in the fact that I was from a middle-class family that had decent health insurance. So that was a possibility that we just didn't do. And the fact that I'm not sure how we would have responded back then if someone did suggest therapy or anxiety medication. I have tried anxiety medication before as an adult, and my parents were pretty against it. And I'm sure the version of therapy I would have gotten back then would have involved a pastor. So even if I received the diagnosis of anxiety, the one I believe very well could have been the right one, I'm not sure if I would have gotten the correct treatment anyway. But mental illness is real. The difference is how you go about treating it. This has already gone on for too long, but I feel like one really important thing to consider is that most of the reason we do anything is because we trust someone. It's a really important point that I took away from my now ended favorite podcast, Oh No, Ross and Carrie. As a kid, I trusted my parents' judgment, and they trusted their chiropractor's judgment. Now I trust my doctor's judgment, and most of the time, scientific consensus. There is such a thing as a second opinion, but even seeing a medical professional in the first place requires you to trust the established parameters around how someone gets to have that job. This is the reason I get so frustrated by pseudoscience practitioners, especially those who are actual medical doctors. The general public doesn't have the time and energy and education to pick apart everything to determine who they should trust, which is why regulations are a good thing. I know everyone loves when I talk about politics, but they are inextricably linked, the medical field and politics. They just are. This one was kind of hard to talk about. I hadn't really thought about all of that in that much detail in years, and I do feel a little bit more at peace, but I think I'll always have complicated feelings about it. But yeah, let me know what you think about all of that. I was going to say it's not really worth telling me what you think the diagnosis should have been because we'll never know, but that's still engagement, so do whatever you want. But yeah, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy my content, and I will see you next time.